It's a bad time to be a globalist. What with Trump in the Oval Office, the Marxist Pope finally gone, and now Klaus Schwab, the great villain of all free people, resigning from his role as head of the World Economic Forum. Of course, whether or not Schwab is also resigning from his role as the world's greatest villain is another question entirely, and we'll get to that with our next guest. For our part, though, we here at The Absolute Truth and Lindell TV support sending Klaus Schwab a nice going away present full of his favorite bugs to eat, since he and the WEF were so gung-ho about trying to force us little people into eating the bugs. My next guest, Alex Newman of Liberty Sentinel, has been shining much-needed light on the terrible darkness that is the globalist agenda, and he joins us now to talk about what happens next and how best we can finally put the nail in their coffin. I do fear, Alex, that we're in a game of whack-a-mole, right? We'll feel like we've whacked that last head of a globalist, yet another one will pop up. What moment do we find ourselves in? Clearly they are in retreat, but is it just in order to take a breather, regalvanize the troops, and come back with a vengeance?
It's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me, Emerald. And we've seen this strategy with Marxists for many generations. They'll take two steps forward, and when the pressure gets too intense, they take a step back. I think right now we're in the take a step back phase. Klaus Schwab is now, I think, almost universally reviled, and people are embarrassed to be seen with him. It's hard to imagine how they chose this guy to be the front man for their agenda. But he said something very profound in his book on the Great Reset that I think bears repeating here. He talked about how under COVID, globalization had gotten a really bad smell. People were outraged by the globalism, and they demanded a retreat from that. But then he says we have an in-between solution, and that in-between solution is regionalization. So we're going to empower these regional governing entities while we get support for globalism built back up again. So I think that's what they're going to try to do. We're seeing very, very quiet progress on the globalist agenda. And I can give you a few examples. Just last week, Emerald, the International Maritime Organization, very quietly, by the way, they put out the press release on Friday, announced the first ever global tax on humanity. It's in the form of a carbon tax on all international shipping. This is huge news. Donald Trump quietly circulated a letter telling them they better not do it. We're going to impose reciprocal measures. They did it anyway. The final vote will be in October. The World Health Organization just came up with the International Pandemic Agreement. They're going to have a final vote on that soon, too. And everybody assumes since the U.S. government's not a part of it, it's not going to affect us. So they're still marching forward, but they realize that they have lost any semblance of public support in the United States, so they're certainly playing defense.
They're playing defense. How do we take the final heads? How do we ultimately destroy them so utterly, terribly bad that they can't come back?
Well, I think to really cut off the head of the snake would be very helpful. And I think for the first time in my lifetime, Emerald, and probably yours as well, we have a opportunity to actually do that. Right? There's legislation introduced in the House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate. It's called the Defund Act. And don't let the name fool you. It's not about defunding the United Nations. In fact, the D stands for disengaging. The E is entirely from the United Nations Debacle Act. So a very important piece of legislation. It was introduced in the House by Congressman Chip Roy, introduced in the Senate by U.S. Senator Mike Lee. And if you look at what Donald Trump has been doing since he came into office, he is probably the first president in either of our lifetimes who'd be willing to at least seriously consider legislation like that. If we were to get out of the UN, we wouldn't have to fight all these individual battles, a pandemic treaty over here, a global tax on shipping over there, a climate agreement over here. It would just stop it for probably a period of decades. And so the globalists have thought about this. They know that this kind of sentiment exists in America. But I think that right there, I did an article about this in the New American back in 2017 as Trump was coming into the White House last time, getting out of the United Nations for good. This would be the ultimate blow to the globalist agenda, because if they lost the UN, they would lose their primary instrument for advancing this agenda.
Well, it seems like now would be the time to strike, right? Because even Politico is basically, as of the last couple of years, noting that if something happened to Klaus Schwab, there would be no real secession plan for him. there's not a real obvious person to take over. And maybe you disagree. And if so, perhaps you already know someone that they'll look to next. But perhaps the globalists are in disarray. And with the departure of Klaus Schwab, it seems now would be the time to strike on any piece of legislation like that, or any moves that would remove us from the UN.
Yeah, I think now is absolutely the time to strike. If you look at what Donald Trump has done early on now in his second administration, this is way beyond what he did in the first. I mean, he drove basically a nail through the heart of the climate agenda, took away all the funding, got us out of every one of the UN's climate agreements negotiated under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So he is like a bull in a china shop when it comes to globalism. Just last week, he proposed cutting all U.S. funding for the UN's peacekeeping forces, which are famous around the world for raping and killing women and children. So Donald Trump is really doing almost everything he can within the limits of his executive authority. But now, again, Congress has the opportunity to take this a step further, because we saw some of this during the first administration. And what happened when we got another deep state Democrat puppet in the White House is all of it was reversed. A lot of it on the first day that Joe Biden was sworn into office. And even if the election coming up goes our way and the next one after that goes our way, at some point, if we're all intellectually honest, we're going to end up with another deep state Democrat puppet in the White House. So these changes have to be institutionalized in law. And Speaker Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Cornyn have a lot of responsibility on their plates. And I think if they start hearing from constituents, if the members of their caucus start hearing from their constituents, the momentum could build. Because these bills have been introduced in Congress forever. Ron Paul used to introduce the American Sovereignty Restoration Act. But now we need really some serious public momentum, and we could get this done.
You know what? That's a great point, and that's what I want to get to next. There's a part to play by everyone in this war against the globalists. As you said, constituents, you're a voter in a certain district. You can call your representative and say, hey, I really want you to vote for this piece of legislation that's been introduced for so long. Give them the support they need. Let them know that you will back them up in your community. You will support them when they do this. That's our part that every average American can play. Then there's the role of state and local officials. And I really like, and I love to give kudos when people do the right thing. This one will be Governor Huckabee Sanders. Sarah Huckabee Sanders authorized the 10 Commandments in Arkansas school. That's something that the globalists had fought against. The globalists are against anything Christian particularly, right? They're totally against Christianity. So this is a way potentially, right, to combat globalism at the state and local level while also strengthening families in the church, which also makes it harder for the globalists to control us.
There's no question, Emerald, and I'm glad you brought this up. I think the most significant action, other than what Trump is doing, that we've seen against globalism over the last few years has come from Republican state governments. We've seen multiple states, not just Arkansas. We've seen Louisiana. We've seen Oklahoma. We've seen a bunch of states moving, first of all, to restore the 10 Commandments into education, to restore the Bible in schools. Oklahoma has now mandated that under the leadership of Superintendent Ryan Walters. We're also seeing bills that explicitly take aim at globalism. Louisiana, for example, passed a law banning the influence of the World Health Organization in its state policies. We're seeing bills like this all over the country. Alabama in 2012 unanimously passed legislation banning the UN Agenda 21, which is the UN's agenda for the 21st century, in any state agency, any local government agency, or in any way infringing on the property rights of citizens there. So there's a lot happening at the state level. We can see much more of that. And people don't realize how easy it is to influence policy at the state level. So we don't have to wait for Congress to act. As we speak, states are taking really, really profound actions that will protect their communities and their states from globalism, and will also lay a foundation for building a new generation that will resist these attacks on our sovereignty, on our families, on our nation, on our liberties. So what's happening here in Arkansas and other states is absolutely huge, Emerald, and I would encourage people to get involved in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And also teach your kids the idea of sovereignty from a young age, and liberty, and a reverence for the 10 Commandments and God and the Bill of Rights. That's also what you can do on your part. Look, Alex, I want to keep a watch on this. You said it's October that we'll know more about this maritime tax, the shipping tax, and this really is, it's very important because this would essentially be a backdoor way to fund a one world government. So this is no small item, and obviously Trump, it's on his radar. He's already trying to counter this, so that's great news to start with, but we'll keep our eye on that, and we'll have you back. But we'll have you back before then. Thank you so much, Alex Newman with the Liberty Sentinel Media. It's always good to see you.
You too. Thank you so much, Emerald.